Okay. Bhanvi, we start in 5.
Namaste and greetings. I, Bhanvi, researcher at IMPRI, Impact and Policy Research Institute, Prabhav एवं नीति अनुसंधान संस्थान, नई दिल्ली, extend my warmest welcome to you all to IMPRI. We are gathered today for a panel discussion on General Election and Interim Union Budget 2024-25. As part of IMPRI 4th annual series of thematic deliberations and analysis of Interim Union Budget 2024-25. This discussion is organized by the Center for the Study of Finance and Economics, IMPRI Impact and Policy Research Institute, New Delhi, as part of IMPRI #Web Policy Talk series. I welcome all of you to this enlightening deliberation and thank you for tuning into this discussion. Now, let me introduce this team gathering. Our chair for the session is Professor Nilanjan Banik, Professor, Mahindra University, India, and visiting consultant, IMPRI. We welcome you, sir.
Thank you.
The distinguished panelists for the session are Mr. TK Arun, independent journalist, Mr. Saugata Bhattacharya, former chief economist, Axis Bank, Dr. Pooja Misra, professor of economics, BIMTAC, Professor N R Bhanumurthy, Vice Chancellor of Dr. B. R. Ambedkar School of Economics, University, Bangalore, Dr. Rajesh Shukla, Managing Director and CEO, People Research on India's Consumer Economy, Price ICE 360, Indian Institute of Management, Udaipur, and Professor Anurag Banerjee, Professor in Financial Econometrics, Durham University. Welcome, everyone, and we look forward to learning from our esteemed gathering. Now, without any further ado, let us start the program. It is my honor and privilege to invite Professor Nilanjan Banik to start the program with the chair's opening remarks. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Vanbi. Hello, everyone. Welcome to this special post-budget discussion session. I'm personally excited to have with me an eminent set of panel members. Thank you all for agreeing to be part of this discussion. Okay, now here is how it is going to work. I'm going to lay down the context by giving you a brief background about the Indian economy. And each one of you are requested to speak about for between 8 to 10 minutes about what you think about the budget or on some specific topic or areas within the context of the Indian economy that you think you should flag. Keeping in mind that there are a few students in the audience, as a moderator, I will intervene in case I find some of the concept that you are speaking about is difficult to understand. Once we are done with the first sets of discussion, we can take up any question, first with each one of the panel member, if they have any question for one another, and then we'll open up for discussion where we will entertain question from the audience. So in terms of Indian economy, what we find at this point of time, we are in a very interesting crossroad. If you look at the broad headline macro numbers, we are growing in excess of 7 percentage points for the last 3 consecutive years. In terms of employment generation, the government-owned PLFS data, Periodic Labor Force Survey data, is suggesting that number of working age population, meaning the number of people who are actually in the labor force, their number is increasing. The problem is with the quality of employment, and that we are going to speak and hear from our panel members. The other good thing is in terms of growth rate of the manufacturing sector, we are kind of doing well because if I look into the purchasing manager index, both for the services as well as for the manufacturing sector, each one of them is around 60. Any PMI number in excess of 50 kind of showcase the fact that that particular sector is expanding. because the way PMI sector is calculated, it takes into account number of people any industry is hiring, what is the capacity utilization, what is the market size as how it is growing, and any number in excess of 50 is a testimony to the fact that particular sector is growing. In addition to that, we also have had a record amount of both direct as well as indirect tax collection. Within the direct tax collection, you will find the corporate tax collection this year was to the tune of almost 8.5 trillion Indian rupees. Both direct and indirect tax taken together, the government is hoping that we are going to cross almost 20 trillion rupees, which is a good thing. The other good thing is fiscal deficit is under control. Also, what we see is in terms of our inflation number, although the headline inflation number are down, the only cause of concern is the price of food and vegetable. So this is in general that what we found at this point of time in terms of the broad numbers. The other thing I should also mention, and we are going to listen from one of our panel members, is the size of the Indian middle class. It is also growing fast, So that is also kind of showcasing that the size of the Indian economy is growing. So at this point of time, I think the problem, the perception in terms of the problematic area has to do with the lower per capita income and perhaps the distribution of income, because the understanding is even though the government data is suggesting that the wage rate is increasing, but in terms of distribution of income, some of the report, for instance, Oxfam report, as well as the World Inequality report, are suggesting that the income inequality is also growing. So with that background, we have had our FM, Ms. Nirmala Sitharaman, presenting the interim budget yesterday. So this is the background with which we are going to start our discussion. So first, let me ask Dr. Banerjee, if you will, Professor Anurag Banerjee, to speak a little bit about what do you think about the India's distribution of income, why you think it is in terms of per capita income, why we are not growing that fast, and then I will invite in order TK, and then followed by that Rajesh to speak on the budget and the growing Indian middle class that we are seeing. So over to you, Anurag. You are muted.
Sorry. Yes. Thank you, Nilanjan. Yes, I mean, this is a budget, but budget, as you understand, it's a small thing in a country to do. So we look at you pointed out the ideas of the inequality growing and lower, the poverty rate. I think the poverty rates are falling as well, so that's not the problem. And these are kind of functions of a growing economy. Yeah, yesterday I was speaking, and I saw it is very obvious that the inequality has grown for most countries. US has grown between 1980 to 2024 much lower than China. China's inequality.
Anurag, can you speak a little bit loudly? We are not able to hear you properly.
Now?
Yeah, now it's better. Yeah.
Okay, so I should probably closer. Yes, I was saying that between 1980 to 2024, the inequality in the US has grown. but much less than inequality in China. And that's kind of a function of a fast-growing economy. So a fast-growing economy would expand and create more choices for people, and therefore people who can take those choices would get more income. And that's the fundamental way to work.
Hello.
Hello?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah, yeah.
Hi,
We need to.
Nilanjan. Yeah.
Hi, we have started our thing with Anurag, and then we'll come to you, NR. Yeah,
Okay,
hi.
okay.
Yeah, go ahead, Anurag.
Thank you. So basically what I was saying, yeah. So
We are talking about the
basically
inequality in the US.
Yeah, the inequality is kind of a function of a growing economy. So if the growth rate is high, I mean, not always, but if the growth rate is high, then you would expect there is more choices in the economy and you basically grow. And so people take advantage of different opportunities and therefore help. Whereas in inequality, in poverty terms, a growing economy is also good because it reduces the headcount ratio. And so those both are functions of. Now, one of the problems about signal economy, I think, is what's called productivity. So productivity of the population in India is still very low, and it's not an abstract concept. I come and go to India, but I still remember the time when you ask for building materials to come in, you get a lorry, I don't know, and then the bricks come in, and 5 or 6 people bring down the bricks, and then they go. So it's but when in the issue.
Anurag, sorry to disturb you again. We are still not able to hear you clearly. Can you check your mic?
Hello?
Yeah, this is better. But then somehow, yeah.
Okay. Now, the other thing that the productivity is a main concern because the idea that in India that you show, because we have a big population, you show labor at every job without getting into particular. So wages are low essentially because the productivity is low. So wages are what? The amount. So productivity is the amount of you produce per unit of time. And wages are similar, so that's how much you pay per unit of time. And the problem is that no company or nobody would employ you at a higher wage than your productivity because it's a loss. And therefore, unless the productivity increases, your wages will not increase. And
so are you suggesting that because India has a huge population and because the per capita productivity is low, the wage rate is also low because each one of us.
Definition almost. I mean, the way to grow in the beginning, if you go back to Japan or etc., you just employ more people. Okay. And then the two things about productivity, one is human capital, which you have to use because our primary education is bad. We never, I mean, given that we were a socialist country, we never actually subsidized or put effort in teaching at the lower primary level, which kind of literacy and university. Same thing with primary health, we built our aims, but never did the village health center. Anyway, so those are the two primary reasons we don't get healthy population and educated population at the lower end of the market. Even at the higher end, there is an issue, and though we subsidize the higher end of the market more than the lower end of the market, this is a very, very Indian problem, I think. And if that's the case, then the lower end of the market would be constrained by how much they could produce, right? And if they can't produce more, nobody will pay you more. That's the bottom line. And your wage rate gets bounded by your productivity. So the only way you can increase your wage rate or to move the productivity up, and then now the other issue about unemployment sometimes is the lower end of the market is again, so what productivity is bounded above, and in the below your opportunity cost. Your opportunity cost, if you are provided lots of other opportunities coming from social services, then that's your lower bound. You don't go below that. So if the productivity is not high enough, then you will get a lot of unemployment. That's another thing. So the only way is to move up the productivity scale. That requires more capital investment. And I think a lot of capital investments doesn't happen in India. Again, because capital, if you invest in capital, that's part of the money gets, in machinery and things like that gets taxed. So think about the maid who cleans your house. If you gave a vacuum cleaner, you can clean 2 houses instead of 1 and double her income. But you have to teach her how to use a vacuum cleaner, and you have to actually have the vacuum cleaner. So investment in both is necessary. And I think that's the reason, and that needs to be addressed. But obviously, that cannot be addressed at the federal level budget. That has to be addressed at a much lower level. And so that's one thing. And yeah.
So one quick question. So what you're saying, if we understand you correctly, Anurag, is the main problem of the lower wage rate that we see in India has to do with the productivity thing that we are saying. And the reason why we have lower productivity is maybe the government, in this case, the state government, because primary education is a state subject. They are not funding good quality primary education. And because you said that in the secondary level, the government or the tertiary level, the government may be still subsidizing higher education. And because you have a not so good primary education, which is also backed by ASER report, annual survey of education report, we are seeing or tending to reach a condition of lower per capita income. So
that's primarily the case, yes, but primary education doesn't essentially mean just reading and writing. It develops skills. That's why I gave the example of the maid and the vacuum cleaner.
Right. So the maid and the vacuum cleaner is basically saying that you also need to invest as well as give technology.
Exactly. Yes. So you need to invest in that maid who can teach her how to use the vacuum cleaner, and also putting it in the right socket, switching it on, and so forth. So that's also education aspect. That's a part of the skill. And you have to invest in the vacuum cleaner as well.
Yeah.
And
it makes sense.
You can go and clean 3 houses instead of 1.
Right. It makes sense because I was looking at the Twitter, and some of the I think Harsh, one of the industrialists in India, he was complaining that he's not getting enough of crane operator, So
yes, that's another thing. I mean, I think there is a mismatch between the skills available and the skills required. And that's fundamental to, that's a typical matching model in
okay.
And we are probably at the higher end of the market. We are probably producing a lot of people who have no skills either. I mean, we have engineers. I mean, my friends are engineers, but I don't know how many engineers actually do. That's, you know, so again, there is a mismatch of skills.
Okay.
So unless that's at the higher end, but I'm probably more worried about the lower end because that's where the majority of the population is still there, and unless you move them above, so if they start earning more money, they would spend more money. I mean, then they
Okay, so I will come back to you. We have with us Professor Mr. Saugata Bhattacharya. He's in the airport, I was told. So before I come to TK, why don't you take it off? So one of the things we have seen, Saugata, is in the budget is the government has was able to stick to its fiscal deficit plan. The fiscal deficit number came to be below the target, 5.9. They have now reached 5.8. So what's your take on the dynamic of fiscal scenario in India? You have to unmute yourself before we can hear you.
Hi, Nilanjan. Thank you very much for this opportunity. I'm sorry for to everybody viewing this. I'm quite constrained because I can't speak very loudly. So a couple of things. You are completely right that one, the fiscal deficit number, both for FY24 this year, the current fiscal year, and particularly for FY25 next year, came as the major surprise in the budget. Remember that markets were expecting something like 6% of GDP for FY24 and about a 5.3, 5.4% of GDP for FY25, instead of which this number was brought down to 5.1% of GDP, which is very low. And we should have expected this because the government is very serious about getting the fiscal deficit down to 4.5% in FY26, the next year, which is the terminal year of the glide path of the system. So they have to do this correctly. But there are many multiple macro financial implications of this. So number one is that with strong revenue collections, to get the fiscal deficit down, you had to compress expenditure, and which is exactly what has happened. The government has a huge amount of money, because remember that the central government parks its money not with banks, but with the Reserve Bank of India. And when you park your money, for the students, I would ask you to explain this in more detail to your student viewership. So when the RBI parks the money, when the central government parks the money with the RBI, typically that money goes out of the system. So there's a big liquidity shortage in the system. That has implications for credit growth, because remember, you have heard all the commentaries of the banks who have been publishing the results, that their banks are finding it very difficult to get deposits. Yeah, so the only way they can fund a large demand for credit growth is from borrowing, and the RBI is not comfortable with banks borrowing beyond a certain limit. So that's number one. The second part is the reduction in the fiscal deficit has consequences for the borrowing program of the government. So the actual market borrowing program. Remember that the deficit is largely funded both through market borrowings, through T-bills and dated securities, as well as from the small savings instruments. Now, the market borrowing program through dated securities has been brought down even below the level of the FY24 levels. So you could consequently see an immediate reaction in the bond markets with the 10-year benchmark government security coming down by almost 10 points from before the budget. Now, this is good news because even for the Reserve Bank of India, because remember now in this current environment, when at some point in time you begin to ease your monetary policy, the role between the coordination of the fiscal and the monetary policy becomes even more important. Yeah, so that is the second implication of what is likely to in the next few days. Policy committee is going to meet, and one of the key outcomes that they are going to have in front of them is the sharply reduced fiscal deficit, and together with the fact that core CPI inflation is coming down below 4% in the last reading that we had for the month of December. That provides an opportunity for them to ease both the strong stance of monetary policy as well as the massive liquidity deficit in the system, which they have deliberately kept to keep overnight short-term rates at the higher end of that corridor that they operate in. I'm sorry, this is getting a little technical, so let me stop here with these two things.
Yeah,
There are
so
multiple implications.
I have two very basic questions from the standpoint of any economics student. One is, if you are saying that so money is sucked out of the system, it's not in the system.
Yeah.
How come the price of food and vegetables are still in excess of 9%? Or for that matter, if I look into the CPI numbers, if I'm not mistaken, it's around 7%. So in spite of so much money being taken out of the system, my first question would be, why is it that we are not able to control the price, which actually impact the common man like you and me, when we go to the market? And the second implication is, because we are going to the election mode very soon, do you see that the government splurging money on because of election, and will that result in further bout of inflation?
So let me take your second question first. So this budget, the interim budget, demonstrated very, very vividly and clearly that the government does not intend to present a populist budget, because there were one of the key aspects that markets were expecting in terms of the expenditures was an increase in the allocation for the PM Kisan from the monthly 6,000 rupees that is paid to farmers, to increase that to 9,000 or so. Because remember, this farm community is exactly the one which has been deeply impacted by the lower rural wage growth, the other factors that have been brought in. That didn't happen. And this is a signal, because if we expect a continuity in government, this is a clear signal that the government is not going to resort to a populist measure either for elections or for whatever reason. So they are much more interested in looking at fiscal discipline, fiscal prudence, getting the fiscal deficit down. So that's number one. Second question, in terms of why this is with the liquidity deficit, why this is affecting the prices of food and vegetables. To my mind, the food and vegetables is largely a supply. The high prices of inflation, prices of food and vegetables is largely a supply problem. Whenever there's a supply issue, that creates a problem. What happens is that out of your disposable income, when you're spending more on produce, vegetables, etc., you tend to spend less on other discretionary type of incomes, which is one of the key reasons that core inflation seems to be coming down. There are other reasons for core inflation, raw materials, prices, etc. But one of the reasons that core inflation is now down below 4% and is likely to remain relatively soft is precisely this, that a large part of your disposable incomes, discretionary incomes, is actually being spent on the necessities, on food, vegetables, produce, etc., which leaves less money in your hand to be able to buy other things, which is one of the key reasons that we are seeing. And remember, rural inflation has been higher for a long time than urban inflation. It's becoming equated now, but rural inflation has been higher. And it is exactly in the rural areas that we are facing a demand deficiency. Yeah, so that my sense is that the high food and vegetables prices which are being caused, and you can't really do very much without these staples, without these items, necessary items.
If you are
and that is what is impacting consumption of other discretionary items.
So if I understand you correctly, because you're spending so much on necessity items, what if we are you able to hear me?
Nilanjan, you're on mute.
No, I'm not on mute. Are you able to hear me?
Yes, we are. So please go ahead.
Yeah, so basically, Saugata, are you able to hear me? I think you're on.
Okay, so let me leave it at that here. I'll rejoin from another and let me see if I can get the audio.
Sure. We'll come back to you. Okay, so
many thanks, Nilanjan. Many thanks.
Yeah. We'll come back to you. So TK, before I come to you, I want to take that question which I wanted to put across to Saugata. What he's saying that the reason why the price of food and vegetable is increasing has to do with the supply side factor. And because a large chunk of our income is going towards buying the necessity, you still have a higher demand, because you'll have to take food and vegetables, which also explain why the prices are high. But at the same time, if I look into the hotel occupancy rate, or for that matter, airline tickets. I was looking into the price of all this other discretionary type services. Even there, I find that the prices are going up. So is it kind of suggesting that we are in for a K-shaped recovery that people are talking about, that few section of the population, they are doing really well, whereas largely people from the rural areas, they are not able to cope up, and that is also kind of we are getting a sense if you look into the sales figure of Unilever or Dabur or that type of companies. So you can start with that and then give a sense of what do you think about the budget, how was it, and where we can go from here.
Yeah, I hope I'm audible.
Yes, very much.
Yeah. Yeah. So I would tend to agree that there is a sharp division in terms of how people's economic prospects are improving between those at the upper end of the income spectrum and those who are at the bottom end of the income spectrum. Now, Ashok Gulati recently published an article which shows that for the last 5 years, rural real wages adjusted for inflation have been declining for 5 years. And that's not a small thing. And that really impacts people's ability to consume things other than food and the basic necessities. If you look at the sales of automobiles, you will find that SUVs and premium cars sales are zooming, whereas the sales of entry-level cars are stagnant. It's only in December that two-wheeler motorcycle sales actually picked up. Till then, they were also down. So there is seriously a demand problem for people with relatively low levels of income. Now, actually, this is reflected in the budget numbers also. If you remember, in the initial outlays for 2023-24, the allocation for National Mahatma Gandhi Rural Employment Guarantee Scheme was kept at 60,000 crore. But in the revised estimate, we see that the figure has gone up to 86,000 crore, which clearly happened. That is a 43% increase in the outlay. And that happened because of real rural distress, which was driving people to ask for employment under the Mahatma Gandhi Employment Guarantee Scheme, which is actually a door, which is dressed up as an employment guarantee job. Essentially, it's a door. And the employment is designed to ensure that people who are not poor and so are not prepared to turn up for manual labor are screened out. So it's a self-selection tool, that demand for manual labor. It's not really an employment scheme, it's actually a door. So the demand for dole has really gone up 43% over the budget outlay. And if you look at the outlay this year, that has been kept again at the same level, 86,000 crore. So the government is aware that there is actually real rural distress, which must be addressed by measures such as this employment guarantee scheme. You know, inflation is real, and various people have tried to argue that there is no K-shaped recovery, that everybody is, but that's not what the rural real wage in data indicates, or the sales of FMCG goods. FMCG goods are actually now slow-moving consumer goods. They're no longer fast-moving consumer goods because of the compression in demand at the lower end of the spectrum. So clearly there is distress, and the government is aware of that, but it is going to the elections. Also, it is trying to put up a big, and I'm sure Mr. Rajesh Shukla will be able to present his data on how different income categories are fared according to the survey results. Now, there is general perception that the government is actually very gung-ho on its electoral prospects after the Ram temple and all that. I would just like to draw your attention to one thing, which is very much in people's mind recently, that the NDA or the BJP broke away Nitish Kumar from the India alliance. Now, that is a political ploy. You are able to demolish the alliance by taking out a very major figure from that alliance. So it must be seen as purely political. At the same time, you also give Bharat Ratna to a half-forgotten leader from the past, Kapuri Thakur, a champion of the backward caste. But why? If you are so confident of your ability and your appeal and your electoral prospects, why do you need to fortify your armor by inducing defections and by wooing extremely backward caste voters, by giving the highest national honor to their supposed champion of the past? So it's not the case that they are all that confident. They sense vulnerability, and so they are trying to address that through various means. Now, budget allocations also help in that. Now, there are, an interim budget is an interim budget. It's a vote on account. You can't really take its numbers and figures and outlays all that seriously, because these are all subject to modification once the actual budget is presented in July after the elections. But still, to the extent that the people take these numbers seriously, the government wants to send out a picture of fiscal consolidation, of sensible macroeconomic management, and it will even try to wangle rating rate increase from the global rating agencies by citing its fiscal prudence and all that. All that is part of the course. But the increase in outlays for government-funded capital projects, infrastructure projects, that has gone up by 11%. It's slightly higher than the expected rate of the overall GDP growth. The GDP is estimated to grow by 10.5%. The outlay on infrastructure is going by 11.11%. It might be to satisfy some numerologists that they put it, the increment at 11. The figure itself is 11,11,111. And the increment over last year's thing is again 11.11%. But whatever that be the case, if the government, front loads some of that expenditure, it can hope to generate some growth momentum, sustain it. Plus, we must understand that all these schemes that the government has announced, if you are, you take any identity you want, you come from a backward caste, there is a scheme for you. If you are a fisherman, there's a scheme for you. If you are a farmer, there's a scheme for you. If you are homeless, there's a scheme for you. If you are a job seeker, there's a scheme for you. If you are unskilled, there's a scheme for you. If you are a woman, there's a scheme for you. If you are without credible credit rating, there's a scheme for you to get a loan without any credit rating. So every section of the society is being targeted and flooded with some targeted scheme through which the government hopes to pump some money into the voters' hands. And they hope that this will actually of some benefit. Now, this government seems to believe more in schemes than in policy. No economy.
But TK, I just want to ask you that you have so many schemes, that's fine, but you're not allocating money, like you mentioned for the farmers, they have not given money for the insurance sector, for farming communities. So people are not that fool that, okay, you have a scheme, but you're not actually benefiting us, So won't that backfire in the sense?
No. I mean, farmers are not going to look at budget number. Farmers are hearing the speech. They are hearing a scheme being announced into them, right? They are not looking at how much money there is.
No, but Kishan Fasal Yojana, you just mentioned that they have not allocated more money towards that scheme, right? For that matter, even Narega, it's pegged at 86,000 crore. It has not increased. At the end of the day, people do read numbers. If the farmers know that there is a scheme, but money in that particular scheme is not coming through, maybe it can also backfire.
No, the people don't read numbers, and people are their perceptions can be managed, and the government is very good at managing perceptions. So if there is a scheme and there is no money, that is better than there being no scheme and no money.
Okay.
So, and that the government understands very well, and so there are schemes. The latest addition to the n number of other schemes they have is the promise of free electricity by having rooftop solar installed in your own home.
Yeah.
So there are schemes galore. And that is part of the budget's electoral, underpinning.
So are
Which
you
is
saying
what
that
is
these are
political
schemes and
intelligence.
not entitlement? Maybe the government would have done better by saying that right to education type thing, which is entitled. I am, as a citizen, I'm entitled to get this type of services free of cost. So they are not going for entitlement, but for schemes.
No. See, this entitlement is also a bit of a nonsense.
Okay.
You say, I have right to education, and the government is not delivering education. What do? You can approach the courts to get your right enforced. Which court? How long is the number of cases piling up in that court? In what lifetime will you get your right enforced? If the government appeals from the district court all the way to the Supreme Court, will you get your right to education enforced in your lifetime? So there's a so-called, right-based approach to development is also nonsense. Kerala became the most literate state. It became the most advanced state in terms of all social indicators, not by making all these things formally rights for people to enforce, but by politically empowering people and by spending money on these sectors as a government. And the result is there for everybody to see. See, in India, it is used to be very common to discuss development as if Kerala was on some other planet and not part of India. Because Kerala is a concrete example before you how government can be achieved in terms of social indicators. Now, Kerala has other kinds of problems. After having developed your social indicators, you fail to convert those social advances into economic growth through other kinds of wrong policies. But that aside, so, and I want fiscal consolidation also. Now, you are achieving fiscal consolidation essentially through compression of expenditure. You're squeezing your overall size of the budget. In fact, India consistently, all governments have achieved fiscal consolidation, not so much by raising taxes. Taxes are actually going up as a proportion of GDP. There's a marginal 0.1% increase in your tax collection as a proportion of GDP that the government has proposed in this budget. But you are actually compressing your overall size of the government expenditure, total expenditure. As a proportion of GDP will come down by some 0.8 percentage points. 800 basis points, the total expenditure will come down. So, in a sense, this is necessary. Sometimes you are required to, but is the government really withdrawing, temporary ad hoc relief measures during the pandemic? No, those are dispensed for 2 years ago. We don't have those in place anymore. So, effectively, while the government is giving a picture of fiscal consolidation to please the rating agencies and economists like you, in effect, it is actually squeezing expenditure in a manner that will actually depress total demand in the economy and which will actually have negative implications for growth unless your private sector investment goes up in the meantime. Private sector investment doesn't actually go up, it's not going up at all. Now, let me give a larger perspective. We live in a world where most of the advanced world is by policy compressing growth in order to contain inflation. So it is very easy for an economy like India to become the fastest growing economy. US, even despite their 5.5% increase in the policy rates of interest, that economy still grew 2.5 percentage points in the last 1 year. When an economy the size of the US grows 2.5 percentage points, I mean, there's a huge addition to global output, to US output. India, and they are trying to compress their growth. Europe is trying to compress its growth. Japan has been trying to compress its growth to combat inflation. So the bulk of the world is trying to compress its growth in order to battle inflation. And that is actually favorable to India's growth because all commodity prices are being suppressed because of this clamping down on growth in the advanced world and demand for commodities coming down, including of energy. So this should be feeding India's growth because we are able to afford to buy these inputs, commodities, energy, steel, whatever,
How much is
at a
the
lower
China
price.
factor? How much is the China factor? Because one can also argue China is slowing down, which is actually having a beneficial impact on not only the price of commodity, but because they are one of the largest exporter, if your economy is slowing, they are able to sell their product at a much cheaper price, which is also basically China is exporting deflation.
No, but at the same time, China is also have been typically one of the largest importers from the bulk of the developing world. And when they cease to be that source of demand, there will be, negative income effect in all these economies. And in turn, their demand for produce from economies like India will also come down. So China is not, I mean, it's not a uniform story of, it's vacating space for India's exports to grow. Because Chinese slowdown transmits slower growth to all those economies which depend on exporting heavily to China. So that's not particularly good for India's growth. But what I'm saying is, India should actually be able to utilize the lower commodity and energy prices induced by slower global growth to accelerate overall infrastructure building and general economic activity. The entire developed world is aging, and the aging world has saved enough to take care of their old age pensions. Those savings need to be deployed somewhere where there will be decent generational returns on this deployment. So they are only too happy, they are eager actually to invest in an economy like India. But still, our ability to attract foreign savings, to absorb foreign savings, which will be actually reflected in your current account deficit, is still very low. The net external savings that an economy absorbs is reflected in the current account deficit. Our current account deficit has been consistently low. Now, we have to keep it within some prudent levels of size. If it becomes too large, then it's a risk. If it becomes too low, we are not absorbing foreign investment. But what I'm saying is, at a time when the rest of the world is eager to put their savings in us, we are still not fully able to do that. India fell 8 positions in the Global Corruption Perception Index, published by the Transparency International. We are 85th in 2022. Now, in 2023, our position is 93rd. So, if a country is perceived to be corrupt, people are not very happy to, place large-scale investment in that economy. The Hindenburg report damaged India's corporate governance reputation. Now, if your corporate governance is not decent, if your numbers cannot be trusted, if your accounting profession can turn a blind eye to various kinds of manipulation, then how will people entrust their savings to an economy like this? If they invest in a company, are they guaranteed that they will actually generate returns? And in case they do generate returns, they will be passed on back to the investor. Now, these are all issues that we need to address at a structural level. Are we, has the budget made any attempt to address these kind of issues?
But corruption is something you fight out in the court. That has nothing to do with the legislature, right?
No, absolutely not. Corruption is ingrained in our political system.
Okay.
Among the world's largest democracies, India is only one where there is no, mass funding of political activity by the people. If you take Britain, you take the Labour Party, 70% of its funds come from trade union contributions. The remaining come from individual contributions by individuals. Almost all of the Conservatives' funding comes from donations. Some old peers and lords, actually, when they die, they leave their estate to the Conservative Party. So there is an established audit trail as to who is funding whom. In India,
no, so that's a big elephant in the room, the political funding that we are talking about. So
if your political funding is not transparent, then your corporate governance cannot be good. Then your accounting cannot be good. So that is a big thing that people understand.
Okay.
So I'm saying is that the budget, while it is at the superficial level, it looks non-populist. It is fiscally consolidating. It is actually populist by announcing any number of schemes targeting every individual segment of the society. At the same time, apart from trying to take care of rural distress by a huge allocation to for employment guarantee scheme, and by allocating sufficient capital to keep the growth momentum at least where it is through this infrastructure spending, it doesn't tackle attempt to address any of the fundamental issues that is constraining India's growth and keeping it below the two-digit level where it should actually be reaching.
Okay, so I will come back to you on that. Now let me go to Rajesh because that's not a that great optimistic note that we ended with TK's thing. But Rajesh, we'd like to hear from you. You're doing a fantastic work in terms of collecting data on the growing Indian middle class. And I was reading one of your report, which got published in Times of India, suggesting that after COVID, there has been a surge in both low income people as well as the high middle income category people, right? So in the context of budget, what do you think? What do you make out of it? And uh, where we are going? Is the narrative what PM as well as the FM is suggesting that Vikashit Bharat, we are going to become a 7 trillion economy by 2030 and developed economy by 2047? How realistic are these claim, And given your data, what do you think?
Thank you, Nilanjan, and it is a pleasure to hear actually all the panelists. It is knowledge actually a lot of, and let me, as you mentioned, let me actually focus majorly on the Indian consumer economy and particularly the household sector. And let me also say, as you mentioned, that the my discussion and my submission is more what I have observed from the primary data research which we are undertaking. And here I am using practically the 3 rounds of our survey, and one is like national level survey which we undertook covering the rural and urban India, approximately 40,000 to 60,000 households in 2016, and then followed by 2020, which was the COVID year, and 22-23. So two are the one is a pre-COVID, another was the last one was the post-COVID, and one was the during COVID. And we tried to collect the information on 17 themes, including the income, expenditure, saving pattern, even there you can say occupation, a lot of indicator. So let me start saying that the let us come to the, you can say, the how currently India is doing actually. Post-COVID means like it is now 2 years. And what we are observing, and I am speaking actually from the data point of view, and practically what we have observed is during COVID period, the things is actually the happen very, you can say, very different way, which is actually what we have observed from the data. It is significantly different from what people are perceiving actually in terms of, for example, one simple thing is like if you are talking about the 3 trillion, then 5 trillion, 7 trillion, or 30 trillion by the 47. But most important thing, Nilanjan, here is understand how this is distributed across the population, across the geography. As TK mentioned, Kerala is not actually Bihar. Bihar is not equivalent to, you can say, Punjab. Punjab is not equivalent to Maharashtra. And also one has to look at the bottom of pyramid to top of pyramid concentration. Third thing, also important to look at the developed state versus underdeveloped versus Bimaru state. So if you are talking about the 3 trillion are expecting 2028 5 trillion, how it is distributed among the population group, that is more important. So that I will focus. Let me say, if we are looking at the simple distribution, like in economics term, is the per capita income quintile, which is actually the bottom 20% and top 20%. In between, there are 3 other quintile. So if you look at the, like in 2015-16, the share of bottom 20% in the total personal disposable income was 7%. And the top 20% was approximately 45%. During the COVID period, there is significant decline in the bottom 60%. And the bottom 20% share declined from the 7% to 3%, less than half actually. And the increase in the top is gone from 45 to 56%. And I will come to the what is actually its implication. And when we have surveyed after 2 years in 22-23, we have noticed that again the share of bottom 20% increased. And I will tell you
one quick question. Are you serving the same household over a period of time? Or
no, it is a mix of both. Actually, we are having actually approximately 15% are the panel and the 85% are the fresh household. And here I would like to just mention, it is a scientifically designed where actually the people from the Indian Statistical Institute or the, you can say, Delhi School of Economics, ISI, or the IGDR, Professor Pradhan, a lot of people are on the advisory who was, and this is conceptualized when I was the NCR in 2005, and TK is aware about that. So it is mostly, I can just say, the very scientifically designed. And let me also say one thing, it is a private funded project actually. We are not actually it is a Tata Trust is pouring all the money, and thanks to Tata Trust as well as TVS Motor, Maruti, they are putting riders. So it is more or less a open source for the researcher. So coming to the now in 22-23, the bottom share has increased from 3% to the 6%. And the top decline again from the, you can say, 56% to 46%. It's still 1% higher than the 2015-16. So one story is trickle down effect happened during this period. Let me also come the why this is happened and how this is happened. So total, if you look at the distribution, now the coming in real term, how much actually it is growth happen in terms of the average household income. So what we have observed during the COVID period, bottom 60% lost their income during the COVID period. But now you can say except the bottom, other actually across the board, they have actually achieved the level of the 2015-16. But still the bottom 20% has not achieved the level of the 2016, actually the income level in real term. And let me give you the example. In real term, average household income of bottom 20% was in 2015-16 was 1.34 lakh. In 2022-23, it is still 1,14,000. It's still like the one can just say 85. Yeah.
And how many people? Yeah, how many people are there in a household on average?
On an average, we are getting approximately at this 4.6 person.
So per capita wise, it's 2 lakhs divided by 4.5.
Yeah, no. In the bottom of pyramid, you'll find the household sizes are larger than the top of pyramid. So because
per capita wise, it's even more skewed then.
Yeah, more skewed. You'll find. And then let me say now come to the second point, which need to be understood here is like if you are looking at the bottom of pyramid, only one example, lost their 50% income because of the COVID, but gained the 75% during last 2 years. And let me say why. Because who are these people? These are the people, 80% lives into the rural India. Means of the 20%, if you are taking bottom 20%, 80% in the rural, 20% in the urban. Those who are in the rural, they are mostly the agricultural labor or non-agricultural labor, what we call at Manrega and other things. Okay. And those who are actually in the urban India, they are the petty traders. they are rickshaw puller, they are actually thelawala, they are actually the Tuesday market, Thursday market, those who are people. So these are the people, hawkers. So they last during the COVID period heavily because of the economy was closed, even in urban India. And another segment was those who are actually the working in the household sector, like those who are maid servant, are drivers. These are the people in the urban India, those who have lost their entire source of income during the COVID period because of the lockdown. So their share suddenly gone down actually in terms of 7%, 3%. When economy become new normal, then people start coming, even the reverse migration happen and everything. So they start getting the work. Again, the household industry got everyone got the maid servant, or you can say the also drivers, everywhere people are start earning. So, but still it is not reached up to that level. So here is the question, how much recovery has happened? Recovery is happened, trickle down happened, but still bottom 20% is not at the level of the, you can say, of the 2015-16. Second point I would like to say, we are talking about the inequality. We have to very much careful about what type of inequality we are talking. If you are taking Oxfam or the word inequality, all these inequalities are based on the tax data, or you can say the poverty inequality lab data, or here or there are the somewhere it is a consumption expenditure inequality. Practically, let me say, if I recall correctly, there are only few income data sources in India. And I can just say privilege to that when I was in the NCR undertook actually study National Survey of Household Income Expenditure in 2005. And currently we are having 3 rounds. And these are the income survey. I am not talking income question. These are the income survey. Income survey and income question is having huge difference. Asking a question to Nilanjan, what is your household income, is not income survey. Income survey need to be conceptualized the way international researchers and international institutions which recommend these are the actually income survey.
So do you ask your neighbor as to what may be, let's say, Nilanjan's income, or for that matter, Rajesh's income, and then try to cross-verify?
No, it is, let me say that there, because we are having approximately 60 income sources for each household. So when you are asking not the directly income, you are asking starting from your age, gender, your occupation, education, then what is actually the what is your earning, and each member you are asking in your family, those who are earning member, and then you are aggregating. Okay, if you are salary, how much is your actually the bonus, how much is PF, how much is means all these indicate. Similarly for agriculture, what is the land, how much you have cultivated, how much your input, how much. So each category, like for labor, we are asking how many days you have worked, what is actually the daily wage rate you have got, and then you are getting the means indicator input for the income, and then you are calculating. It is not one simple question. We are not asking what is your household income. No, we are asking component of income as per the international. So we are, and then there are a lot of linkages. There is no actually question that there is not there is no limitation of this. Even globally it is accepted. What we are covering approximately 60% of the personal disposable income reported by the CSO, which is covered in our survey, which is a very good indicator if you are comparing with globally. So that is one way. And the second thing, we are having other way of and I can come and I can discuss sometimes how the quality is. But coming to larger point, the income inequality. So here we are having income inequality, and we have calculated, and currently we are working with word inequality lab also. Lucas is using our data to just find out, because wealth and this one, and we are thankful to the word. So during the 2015-16, income inequality was approximately 0.41. During the COVID period, income inequality has gone remarkably high, approximately 0.51. And currently, again, when the income distribution rationalization is happening, a difference between this. So in 2050, now we are getting approximately 0.4. 0.4 is still actually, it is a little bit higher than 2015-16. So what it is indicate, ratio between the top to the bottom income was approximately 5 times, means highest income category of the household were earning approximately 5 times to the bottom in the 2015-16. Increased to the 11 times in the during period distance, and currently it is 7 times. So still we are not actually, so income inequality is declining, but not at the level of what was the pre-COVID period. This is the second point which I would like to mention. Then it is an income, but what we are also collecting information on the occupational pattern. During this period, the biggest gain happened during the actually COVID period. The biggest loss happened, what TK was mentioning in the rural, was the agriculture labor, and the negative growth in the during the COVID period happened. And they are the major gainer this time, TK, during the like the, if you compare the gain, it is the agriculture labor is the highest gainer, is approximately 59% increase from COVID to 9. Means because of the whatever it is data is coming, because of the again engagement in the new normal is coming. I will come to the little bit why consumption is my opinion about consumption, because we are collecting data. Now coming to actually the also we have collected data on let me say that the caste, religion also, and this is self-reported. What we also, and thanks to TK, when in 2002 2003 we are collecting this data, what you are reporting, and we are asking like what is Nilanjan, what your caste is, what is your religion is. It is self-reported. General actually trend which is coming, the biggest recovery happened among the OBCs household. And why I'm making biggest recovery happen among the Muslim, actually the Muslim community during this period. And why I'm making this point is it is coming from the data. And if I am not actually political analyst, I don't know, but the sum of the result which is going here are there. A lot of discussion is happening, but result are coming something different from the elections. And one of the actually the people are getting the benefit from the farmer, like the all the benefits here are there are minor, are I will come the where the problems are actually in the some of the things which we have observed, but it is in some way it is actually percolating at different caste, religion here are there, and it is depending on the which state and how state is implementing. That is second part. Third part, now I am coming to the middle class size. You want to say something? You are unmute actually.
Yeah, for the benefit of two other speakers, I request you to wrap up within maybe two or 3 minutes. Yeah.
So I am there. So looking at the 40, I mean, like the 2030 and the 2047, let us see that this budget is, I will say that for us it is just indicative. What is going to happen in July might be something carry forward or something going to major change. So my actually way of looking it is something like the before marriage there are certain promises, but when you are going to attend the marriage, then you will see what you are going to get out of when along with the bride or groom, what you are getting during the bidai time, what you are getting actually. So let me come to the actually the middle class. So what we have projected in 2022 December, still we feel actually this is happening, although like government is actually some of the things are very matching. So our numbers it is appeared much earlier. So we feel okay, whatever we have done, we have taken longer view. And the two things, we have just simply assumed that 6.76% GDP growth between 20 to 2030, actually 10 years. 6.76, very conservative. Urbanization is approximately, we have taken approximately 41% by 2030. And third is there are other factors. So we are expecting that currently 30%, 31% middle class. By 2030, it will be 47%, and by 2047, it will be 61%. Why middle class is important? Middle class is because the 30% household is having half of the income, half of the your consumption, and more than 60% of the saving. Second point is if you are looking consumer durable, 60%, 70% of the car with the middle class. If you take all the refrigerator or AC, and these are the actually major because they are just come out from the poverty, there is less likely they are again going. So here is the market. So it looks bright, whatever if growth is going to happen. So it looks actually the reasonably optimistic about the future. My 2 or 3 concerns actually, which I would like to just mention, then I will. First thing is everything is not rosy actually. Our data shows is the actually welfare schemes. So there is certain you can check balances going here or there, but we have noticed that the benefits are going for the even those who are non-eligible for the beneficiary, they are also getting. For example, if you take the like Kisan Nidhi, or you take the even the Anna Yojana, even the rich or middle class are also getting these benefits. So there are actually the not identification of the something is okay, but it is not the, it is also percolating. So 40% of total benefit is going somewhere, which is actually the need to be just looked. That is one. Second is like Kisan Nidhi. I would like to just mention there are 25% farmers, so-called farmer as a source of income, but they are not having land actually. So they are not getting any benefit because of they are engaged into the farming, but not getting benefit of the Kisan Nidhi because they are not having the land and other thing. They are not, as per the government, they are not. So with these two, I believe in the near future, there are things are happening, but it need to be rationalization and correction factor by which at least such type of thing or schemes, if it is need to be continue with the, it might be the lower budget, and then you will have more budget for the infrastructure and maximum welfare for the people. Thank you.
Thank you, Rajesh. Before I come to NR, I have just one quick clarificatory question, which is, are you distinguishing between middle class and middle income group?
You see, the means in our middle income group is different. If we are taking like the quintiles, so middle income group is coming. If you are taking the second quintile to the second, third, and fourth quintile, this is a middle income group. Okay. But our middle class is, and that is middle income group is 60% actually.
Right.
But our middle class, which we are defining based on the average, average household income, we are talking about the 5 lakh to 30 lakh income bracket as a middle class, which
5
is
to 30.
30 lakh.
Huge. Yeah.
Huge, actually. Yeah. So there are two, like lower middle and upper middle. So 5 to 15, 15 to 30. But entire is middle class, which is, I am talking about the 30%. So you can take the, like top 20%, if you are taking, 4% are the rich, those who are earning more than 30 lakh. So next 18%, like the 16% plus another 16% of the next quintile is the actual middle class, which we are defining actually. Oh. So middle income is the 60% middle, but middle class is 30% of the top actually.
Oh, and what would be the per capita basis income for that? How many household?
Particularly for middle class?
Yes.
Middle class, I will tell you. The middle class, your per capita income, annual per capita income is like 1 lakh, 1 lakh to 7 lakh.
Oh,
per capita.
Okay. Thank you, Rajesh. That was a quite optimistic note, unlike TK, which we ended on a pessimistic note. Welcome, Professor Bhanumurthy. It's glad to see you after so many days. So let's start with your specialization, which is, I think, looking into the public finance part of the budget. So in general, what do you think of the Indian economy and how do you rate our budget? Over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Nilanjan. So it's nice to see all of you after a long time. I can see TK and Dr. Pooja Misra for some time now. And I think Saugata also was there. Now I don't know whether he's around.
No, he had a flight to catch, so he just
okay,
came.
yeah. So after listening to TK, I don't know what I should speak. I had a absolutely optimistic view of the budget. So now I have to rethink before I face TK by making that statement that I still feel very optimistic about the Indian economy. And I think he also did that comparison with other countries. So if you actually do the real comparison between the countries with India and other advanced countries for the past 2-3 years, I don't see any reason why we should not accept that India is a bright spot in a troubled global economy. So it's not just for 1 year, it's for the past 3 years, we have been growing at 6 to 7%. And I hope we believe those numbers, but so that's what the number that we have right now. Even if you look at the growth and inflation trade-off, and I think we have done much better. In fact, India's the public policy, particularly the coordination between fiscal and monetary policies, in my view, has become an example for how you can deal with the kind of a once in a century crisis that we faced as in the form of COVID. So again, if you want to really compare that how we fared well, we may have to look at how we fared during 2008 crisis. Now, I know you want to see, I mean, I'm sure TK has written so much on that. So how we managed or mismanaged or bundled, whatever it is, the whole global financial crisis. In fact, there was no crisis in Indian economy due to the global financial crisis. Because of the response to the global financial crisis, we got into the crisis, I think. And that's where I would like to compare the interim budget with the 2009 interim budget, and also with 2014 interim budget, and also with 2019 interim budget. So if you look at the last 3 interim budgets, I would certainly say that this interim budget, which was presented yesterday, is, I think, absolutely a pure economics or pure public policy, less of populism or less of election oriented. In fact, then people started arguing that government seems to be very arrogant, that they don't need populist measures to really come back. Of course, as TK pointed out, there's a lot of action happening on the non-economic front, so maybe on the politics side. But I think when it comes to economics, I think the yesterday's budget is a purely a textbookish, in my view, which should be the interim budget. I think that's what I've written in my Financial Express today. So this will be a proper example of a fine interim budget where there is no politics into that. And most of the discussion happened since yesterday, not on the 2024-25 numbers, rather on 2023 and 24 numbers. I think Saugata said that it was a surprise that government would contain fiscal deficit to less than 5.9%, because the market was expecting 6% and all those things. But again, I think what is missing in many of the discussions for the past maybe a year or so, especially after this nominal GDP growth numbers came for 23-24, was that I think you need to understand the fiscal deficit as a ratio to GDP. You have a numerator and denominator. So whatever happened on the numerator actually compensated much more than on the denominator. I think that is one reason why you would see that a slightly lower fiscal deficit to GDP ratio. In fact, I think maybe I'm the only person who said it will be much less than 5.9%. For a simple reason, we have been seeing that every month we have been surprised by this GST as well as the direct tax collections. Now, if you look at the budget size has not declined, it has increased. What is declined is the size of the fiscal deficit in levels. This is the second year, I think. I mean, rather, this is the first year. The budgeted numbers, the fiscal deficit headline levels is actually lower than the previous years. Now, is it a compression of the fiscal policy? I don't think so. For me, I think I've been arguing for quite some time that the whole process of whole philosophy of focusing more on capital expenditure is actually coming back and helping us in a big way. And whatever compression happened is mostly on the subsidy side. I just wanted to tell TK on that. Actually, the decline in the fiscal deficit is largely being contributed by the decline in the subsidy bill. Okay, it's almost 0.8% of GDP decline in the subsidy bill come between the 2 years. So I think that is something that, I mean, if you want to argue that subsidies you have to increase or decrease, that is a different question altogether. But I can also argue why there is a decline in the subsidy bill. Maybe if you have any questions on that. So the point I'm saying is the 3 years of capex strategy has actually led to a larger, in fact, my causality. I have dabbled with these numbers for almost 15 years right now. I know the causality, how it works. The causality is actually from capital expenditure to GDP growth to revenues, both tax and non-tax revenues, and the tax revenues to the revenue expenditure. So the revenue expenditure has actually not declined, it has actually increased. So the argument is that the addition to the numerator, if it leads to higher addition to the denominator, obviously my fiscal deficit as a ratio to GDP has to come down. And I think that is what we are seeing right now. And again, as TK pointed out, people are trying to compromise on the GDP to bring down the inflation. And even that we have not done in the last 3 years. Okay. And we are still within the official target, right? Except for 1 or 2 months. So we are still managing the balance between the growth as well as inflation. Of course, there are other concerns. There are other concerns. In fact, for me, I'm sure some of you must be reading that. I have been arguing that the public debt to GDP ratio should be the anchor for any public policy. Now, states have completely forgotten. I don't think they know what is the public debt to GDP ratio. And I'm sure the state from where TK is coming, they don't know what is the public debt number, and they don't want to know. But if you look at the markets and if you look at the central government, I think somehow there is a white paper coming up every quarter, but I don't think I'm sure none of us have read that kind of reports. So the quarterly reports and the white paper and public debt to GDP ratio is something that should become a anchor for any fiscal policy. Now, if you look at those numbers, if you look at for the next 2 years, they talk about glide path, even there we don't see a significant reduction in the public debt to GDP ratio. Now, many people argue that we are not coming back to the pre-COVID situation and all those things. We are not come back to the pre-COVID situation even when it comes to fiscal deficit to GDP ratio. The fiscal deficit to GDP ratio was just 3.5%. So when are we coming back to that? Now, the argument is that CapEx has not led to private investment, right? I think the crowding in has not happened. But if you look at the last 3 or 4 months data from RBI, there are signs of credit offtake happening. And in fact, even if you look at the advance estimate, the first time, I think the investment rate, what we call it as, if you add that GFCF and invisibles and all those things, right now it is about somewhere close to 37% of GDP. We have come back to, maybe almost like a 2007 or 8 kind of situation where we had 39 to 40% investment rate. So there are investments happening. Of course, the major part is being driven by the public policy, the government expenditure. But I think I would see that there are some signs of revival in the private investment right now. And because the size of the fiscal deficit is also declining, again, I think Saugata has pointed out that today the markets already started showing its impact. So there was a 10 basis point reduction in the bond yields. So I think if that happens, and if there is a inflation expectations are contained, I think we will be seeing that the transmission happening towards improving more private investment. So the overall, my point is, I think we have managed well. We have managed macro growth and inflation much better than many other countries. And at the same time, Of course, the challenges are much more at the state level. Okay, and I think even there, this interim budget trying to show some kind of continuity in terms of handholding capital expenditure by the state level. So I think even that is happening. And there was one more policy that came up where you want to have some kind of level playing field, and they're trying to encourage reforms at the states. So if that happens, we should be having a slightly balanced kind of a regional growth. Otherwise, I think one of the important things that many people missed in that budget is where this trying to address the regional disparity and regional inequality. I think that part seems to be missing. And the second part, do I have 2 minutes?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because we also have to give Pooja.
Yeah. So I'll just take
Yeah.
definitely 2 minutes. And then we have been tuned, I think, from our school days, that if any scheme happens, means every year it has to increase, go on, increase 10%, 15%, or 5%, whatever it is. I think that trend kind of analysis, I think we need to come out of it. And I think the finance, I mean, this has been, I've been arguing for quite some time. You need to have sunset clauses for most of the programs. I'm not saying all the programs. There should be sunset clauses for most of the programs. And I think yesterday, what finance minister hinted about the outcome based, right? And also talking about the saturation. I think these two aspects is something new in the interim budget. I'm hoping whichever government comes in June and July. So I think they need to scale that particular concepts. And I'm talking about public expenditure efficiency for a long time. I hope sometime I would see that as part of the public policy that there'll be focus on improving public expenditure efficiency. Let me stop here.
NR, fantastic. Just a quick question before I come to Pooja. You were mentioning about the causality, right? From the capital expenditure to the government revenue numbers. How much of this capital expenditure is going to create jobs? And are they going to absorb, let's say, not that skilled labor? Do you believe in that theory?
Well, I mean, I'm sure if capital expenditure is there, I think there will be employment much better than consumption expenditure. So I think to that extent.
So the consumption expenditure is not directly getting impacted because.
Exactly.
So what is the lag before it can hit the consumption expenditure? That is something we are trying to understand.
Yeah, that's what I said. No, the causality, the growth and taxes and revenues.
Yeah.
No, but let me answer your question a little more directly. In fact, we were doing some work for Ministry of Rural Development. Particularly, they asked me about employment impact of Prime Minister Awas Yojana, Gramin, right? So if you look at Prime Minister Awas Yojana, it's a purely construction activity. And it's again the capital expenditure. And similarly, there was another program called Prime Minister Awas Yojana, Urban. So there are two studies that we have done. And both the studies very clearly show that, I don't remember the exact numbers right now, but certainly it has a direct employment benefits and also there are indirect employment. Okay. So I think both these things has to be estimated. In fact, we have estimated, and I think it's in public domain right now. It's almost 3 years old, so I have not gone back to that. But certainly we believe it will have a much larger impact on the overall growth as well as inflation. And in a way, I'm talking about ultimately balancing at a macro sense. You have to balance nominal GDP growth should be equal to real GDP growth plus inflation. So any increase in the nominal GDP growth should have a larger impact on real GDP growth with lesser impact on inflation. I think that is the mechanism that we look at.
Oh, thank you. Okay, so that's an optimistic note. Now let me come back to you, Pooja. You are the last one, and we have heard so many things, starting with productivity, with the middle income boom. Then, of course, maybe the government are not doing that great in terms of the allotment of public social welfare schemes. And now from NR, we have heard that, in fact, he is very pleased with the government containing the fiscal deficit. So why don't you take it from here, maybe emphasize a little bit more on the skill part, because that is quite important for the Indian youth to get employment. Because as we look into the CMI data, or for that matter, even the PLFS data, there are indication people in the age group between 18 and 28, they are the one who are not getting maybe quality jobs. So over to you, Pooja.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much, Nilanjan. If you ask me on a personal level, I'm totally with Bhanumurthy ji. Yes, I'm pretty optimistic. Only one thing that surprised me a little is a couple of years back, the government talked a lot about the national monetization pipeline, and somewhere it's getting lost a little. So maybe they need to come back and refocus on it. I'll move to the skill development part. Uh, Considering that I'm coming from an educational institution, obviously that's very close to my heart also. Uh, if you remember, the earlier this week, there was this review of economy document which was released, and the positive part that was given in that document was that there has been a massive push which has been done as far as skilling is concerned since 2014. Our employable percentage of students has increased from about 33.9% to in 2014 to about 51.5% in 2024. Fantastic, but keeping a demographic dividend that we have in mind, in my perspective, we still have some way to go on that. Can we just sit back and pat ourselves on the back? No. Obviously, if it's only 51.5% of our youth which is employable, there is a long road to traverse on. So I'll here come back to the national education policy, NEP 2020. Talked very well. Budgetary allocation should be 6% of GDP, in line with developed economies. Fantastic. However, if we go back and actually check the budgetary allocation, I'm sure all of us are aware that it's somewhere in the range of approximately 2.9%, 2.5 to about 2.93%. Give a little, take a little kind of a thing. Actually, when even I looked at the fine print numbers, it said for 23 to 24, it was 1.16 lakhs crore, while revised estimates showed that the spend was only 1.08 crores, So where is the miss? There is a miss somewhere. And obviously, health, education, these are the two places where the government needs to go back and focus so that it gives you a long-term, sustainable kind of a growth. If I look at even higher educational institutions, okay, number was last year about 44,000 crores. This year's budget has shown an increase. Like somebody said, this is anyway an interim budget. Let's hope, let's cross our fingers that that increase should be higher. Reason being because if we are actually wanting to become a developed economy by 2047, and even the finance minister said yesterday, we need to go back and focus a whole lot on skilled and semi-skilled expertise. If I talk of semi-skilled expertise, Skill India program, she spoke about that quite a bit. Good. But on the other hand, so while you're setting up vocational training institutes, etc., what the government hopefully is working on is that you're skilling them, but blue collar and labor intensive job creation is also needed. Otherwise, again, our employable percentage is not going to go up. To move to skilled expertise, again, Digital India is happening. It's been key to formalizing economy. That's what she said also in her speech yesterday. Along with vocational training skills, we need all the new age skill sets, which I'm sure nobody is shying away from, whether it's AI literacy, whether it's environmental sustainability, considering we're aiming to be net zero by 2070. These are all very important skills required in the socioeconomic and technological landscape. Also, if we were to look at the IMF paper, what it said was, as far as AI is concerned, it's going to impact emerging economies. It's going to impact about 40% of our jobs. One thing that came across in yesterday's budget was the focus that they're giving on R&D innovation. Right, 1 lakh crore for private institutions. So obviously, I went back and looked at what about the education industry. That has increased from 210 crore to 355 crore. But again, the thought process is if we are able to encourage innovation at probably college level kind of a thing, it's going to build further, and obviously it's going to build the skills better for all our youth, that is. And it's going to give us long-term good returns. Without any doubt, obviously, what is needed is that as far as the NEP is concerned, it needs to be executed very efficiently. What was fantastic in the NAP was when they said a choice-based curriculum, because that's how you're preparing students to be future ready. Yes, so do the institutions have to do any work? Yes, along with the government. We need to go back and rebuild our curriculum. I'm sure you'll agree with me on that, Nilanjan. Build infrastructure, integrate technology, provide the internet connectivity. And what's important is that we ensure it happens not only in the metro or the metros, that is, but in tier 2, tier 3, and tier 4 cities, because that's where the entire inclusive development can take place. So that was just my quick thing on the skill development part. Does the government need to go back and refocus? Yes. What I would hope for is obviously execution implementation needed, but somewhere again a higher allocation for education industry in the union budget 24-25, when whichever government is there, right? So that that 51.3%, like she mentioned, that the needle can move faster on that. I think that's my little input that I wanted to give.
Great, great. So because we are running short of time as usual, first let me open it to the panelists if they have any questions for other panelists. Anyone? TK, you want to give a rejoinder to NR's comment, or anyone can ask a question to anyone else? Unfortunately, we have Saugata and Anurag. They have left because of some prior commitment. But if you have any question for others,
I would like
comment.
to ask NR. According to the Finance Commission, states are supposed to get 41% of the taxes collected by the center. If you look at the actual budget numbers, they hardly get 32%. What is the magic? Where is the money going?
Yeah, I think it's outside the union budget. But anyway, of course, I mean, I do have some criticism about the Finance Commission, the way they do it and all those things. But this number, like 41 only coming 32 or 33%, I don't think that is entirely right. But there is an argument, despite increase in devolution from 32 to 42% or 41% right now, the transfer from the center to states in all the forms has not increased. I think that is the understanding that I have, because that is the numbers that is showing right now. So only thing that happened between these commissions is that you got slightly something like untied grants, something about 10%. But of course there are other criticism, because the whole what do you say, the divisible pool itself is shrinking because there are some cesses and surcharges that are coming outside that is going outside the divisible pool. And I'm also with anybody who criticizes that you need to bring that cess and surcharges as part of the divisible pool. But otherwise, if you look at the total transfers from center to states, even a strong critic of this fiscal federalism would also argue that it has not increased, neither decreased.
Okay, any other question? So now we can open the question for the participants and the people I cannot see. So Manvi, can you take any question from the participants?
Yes,
They can
sir.
write in the chat box, or if they have any.
So if any of the participants has any questions, they can either raise their hands or write in the Q&A box.
Okay, it seems we have no question either. We have done an excellent job in terms of making others understand what we're discussing. But it's a great discussion we have. In fact, I will go from here with a mixed bag, in the sense that there are some optimistic view, in the sense that one of the good things that we got from the budget is the fiscal prudence stuff, the increase in capital expenditure. Hopefully, because of that, it will also create employment and consumption expenditure, if not in a direct fashion, but maybe through an indirect fashion. The not so good stuff that we come to know from this interim budget is maybe a little bit more allocation to the social sector, be it education, healthcare, would have been better. But after listening to Rajesh about his study, I want to end this session on an optimistic note in the sense that Indian middle class is growing, and that is going to have a salutary effect in terms of sustaining the growth process that we are seeing at this point of time. So one more time, thank you all for coming and participating in this discussion. We hope to see you more often discussing on economic issues. I'm sure that it was a great learning experience for some of our students who also participated. Thank you one more time.
Sir, if you don't mind, I have one question.
Yeah, please.
So there has been a mention that there has been reduction in the multi-poverty, like 25 CR people have been have come out of poverty. And sir has mentioned that there has been reduction in inequality as well. So are they directly related, or it could be some other reason also?
So it's clearly for Rajesh. Over
Yeah,
to you.
this is actually the let me this is two things which is actually the not comparable, because the whatever the multidimensional poverty is calculated based on the entirely different matrix of measurement. That is one, because and the what inequality means, inequality and poverty, it means it might be poverty is actually less, but inequality might be more actually, because the if it distribution is uneven. That is one. Second is also important in terms of the looking at the what actually the Bhanu has mentioned in some way is the distribution of inequality of all kind actually, because what I have talked about it is income inequality, but we are also having like the educational inequality or the infrastructure inequality, health inequality. So all these things are, and the measure, just to add what actually Nilanjan had mentioned, to just mention that is the what I see in the coming days, we have to start preparing. If we are targeting or thinking about the developed India, train ourselves how to handle the developed economy, because we are not experienced at different level from the, you can say, bureaucrat to, you can say, the lowest level. We are not experienced to handle the developed economy. We always tackle the like diarrhea, malaria, all these things. These things where actually we are, and there will be no actually such type of thing. So I believe poverty inequality might be the history, but inequality might be the reality. But at the same time, we have to have actually mechanism to train ourselves to handle the forthcoming or future economy, either it is developed or developing or the, whatever the format is. But future challenges will be entirely different.
Thank you, sir. So I have one more question from TK,
Yeah.
sir. So, sir, as you mentioned that this budget is full of schemes and not policies. So, could you please elaborate a little bit, like what policy measures or what announcements you were referring to?
Like I said, during its high growth phase, China grew at more than 10% for a decade and more. That is what really lifted China from lower middle income country to a high middle income country, which is what lifted nearly 1 billion people out of poverty. China virtually eliminated poverty. Now, India can also grow at that level. We have that potential. Now, compared to that potential, is the budget doing anything to achieve that? Yes, it has allocated some money for capital investment in infrastructure, which is good, but is it enough? What are we doing as a society to improve our corporate governance, to reduce corruption, which will actually allow global savings that are waiting to come to a country like India, to pour into India, to allow the economy to absorb that money and build the economic muscle we need? We are entering not in the industrial revolution kind of an economy. We are entering a knowledge economy where people will create artificial intelligence tools and destroy many kinds of conventional jobs. And we are in a globalized economy where this impact will be felt in India also. How are people equipped to actually withstand this kind of an onslaught of technology and its potential destruction of jobs? Are our people equipped to be at the high end of the skill level where we will use artificial intelligence rather than be its victims? So these are the structural changes that are required for an economy at this stage. You're not even discussing them. This is not part of the public discourse. So in that sense, see, from the conventional point of view, the budget is a workmanlike budget. It's a vote on account. It does not announce any major new taxes. All that is fine. But even the vision we need, instead of just rhetoric about India being developed in that many years and that many trillions and all that, are we addressing the basic, recognizing the basic challenges, and what are we doing to address those challenges? In that, I think we are still deficient.
TK, I have a question from one of the attendee. The person is asking, I have a question pertaining to the manufacturing sector. The interim budget has been pretty dismal in that regard. So do you want to take that? What about the manufacturing sector, or anyone would like to take that?
I think manufacturing has been growing.
Growing,
While it
yeah.
is,
So
I would say the budget actually does bring down various import duties, which is a good thing.
Okay.
We are actually allowing, that's a boost to manufacturing.
What about the PLI scheme? They have increased allocation towards PLI scheme?
Yeah, I'm not a great fan of a PLI scheme per se, but there has been some short-term increase in manufacturing and exports. One major problem with the PLI scheme is that it allows people to say we are exporting so many millions of phones, and so we are actually doing good. But all the components for the phone are still being imported. So the actual value addition that takes place in this economy is relatively small.
Yeah.
So we need the basic investment, the basic capability, the technological savvy to manufacture the components in India. So that, on that we are trying. We are trying to create a chip manufacturing unit, chip unit, packaging unit, and all that. Still there is no headway. So we are still, ultimately adding very little value.
But what about the job creation? If Foxconn is tying up with, let's say, HCL Technology, they are still creating jobs. Or for that matter, Micron, the chip maker, they have tied up with Tata's. They are still creating jobs. So what about the job aspect part of this foreign multinational coming?
You know that the CHIPS Act in the US has allowed the US government to allocate $50 billion of subsidy to encourage Intel and TSMC to set up new foundries in the US. They are unable to go ahead because there is no skilled manpower. The universities in the US have now added new courses which will create the manpower required to work in the chip manufacturing industry. Where do we have the chip manufacturing industry manpower? We can't, 40% of our people cannot read, do a simple division.
So who are doing this job? If let's say Micron is tying up with the Tatas, what type of, so you're saying that very low value addition jobs are getting created, and which is also low paid?
No. So that is the PLI scheme.
Okay.
So the chip foundry, etc., is not just a PLI.
Okay.
See, India has the capacity to design chips, but to what extent is that capacity being utilized? India has the largest pool of technical scientific manpower in the world. That is being utilized to a certain extent by global capacity centers of the multinationals in Bangalore and Hyderabad and Delhi and Noida. But they are working on creating technology whose intellectual property resides with multinational companies.
So I have another question, which is saying that, but sir, with regard to that argument, I think the person is referring to you. Doesn't it make sense to create jobs with semi-skilled labor earning decent forex, at the same time giving a boost to the ecosystem for an economy that has been neglecting manufacturing for export for a long period of time? I think it is a baby step in the right direction. That's what the person says.
So unless we are a completely closed economy, we will not be able to compete on the basis of semi-skilled labor. We are competing with the best and the most efficient in the world when you are in an open economy. The rejection rate in a manufacturing plant in China is below 20 parts per million. That's the kind of quality they are exhibiting when they produce components. Now, and we are competing with that. Either you say we will not allow this kind of industry to come into a system. We'll put high tariff bars. We'll put quantitative restrictions, and then we'll be able to have substandard production in India where we'll employ labor. That's not how we want to do it. We want to improve the quality of our production, quality of our manufacturing. Then we have to compete with the best in the world, and that cannot be done by using semi-skilled labor. We are no longer in the early stage of industrial revolution where unskilled farm hands could join a textile mill and still be productive industrial workers. No. Today, our successful manufacturing companies like Kalyani Ford, every employee has a diploma at least in engineering. They are at least a diploma engineer who is an employee. So manufacturing cannot really take off into sophisticated sectors with semi-skilled labor. Yes, some garment making, some kind of stuff is still possible. And that is what Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, etc. is thriving on. But for a country like India, which wants strategic autonomy on par with China, the US, and Russia, we cannot afford to be left behind just doing semi-skilled labor. We need the entire spectrum of skills. We have some people who are collecting forest produce and making a living out of collecting tendu leaves or mahua flowers and honey or resin, lath. That is one sector. We also have people who can fabricate satellites. Now, what's the weightage of these kind of skills that we need in the economy? If you want to be strategically, autonomous, if you want to have a knowledge economy, and if you want to fully utilize the human potential that resides in India's young people. And what are we doing to realize that? That is the issue.
No, point well taken. Anyway, gentlemen and gentlewomen, thank you very much for your participation. Over to you, Bhanvi, for the vote of thanks.
So there are some more questions from our
Oh,
live audience.
Okay.
So if you allow me, I would go ahead with
Yeah,
them.
please go ahead.
Yeah. So there is one question for Bhanumurthy sir. So in the entire budget, PM has kept focusing on developed India by 2047. So the concern is, are we going in the right direction to achieve where already other developed countries would, and where other developed countries would be by 2047, and in many economic as well as in welfare terms? Adding to this question only, I have one more concern. Like, our budget vision is for sustainable, like going harmony in nature, and focus has been on blue economy as well as other sustainable measures, be it in terms of solar grid, rooftop. So can we say that it is possible to go hand in hand with both? Like, we can achieve developed economy as well, and we can conserve our nature as well.
Yeah, for the first question, I think TK already answered. I think there are many areas where it is, in my view, I think similar to what it is, that there is reforms that are still unfinished. When you talk about manufacturing sector, I think TK, what TK is mentioning is about the structural reforms, right? How many of you remember there were labor codes that was passed maybe 1.5 years back? And what about the discussion on the land? I mean, if you talk about the two major inputs, it's a textbookish kind of a knowledge. So the two major inputs which are required for manufacturing sector, we still don't touch it. They have become absolutely a public policy kind of it's quarantined in a way for the public policy. So we don't talk about that, but we still want to become, developed nation. So I think going forward, maybe those reforms will come back. Because it's passed in the parliament. So I think it should come back, and we should be doing much better than what we are doing right now. And, this 5 trillion, 7 trillion, these are all Excel sheet based, economics. I mean, I don't get into that. But you need to talk about the ultimate parameter, in my view, if you talk about long term, I think the per capita GDP, I think in real terms, that is something that, I mean, I think most of the majority of Indians think that 5 trillion economy is in real terms. So it is simple nominal terms, right? So nominal terms, anybody, in fact, I don't know. I think TK, you should be knowing there was one document, I think Morgan Stanley or somebody brought in, and by 2050, India will become third or second. I forgot. I think there's something like that. And if you see in that same list down the line, which country is on the fifth?
No.
Fifth is Pakistan. Okay, so if you take the nominal terms, so they are growing at 20% with 14-15% inflation. Now we are going 10% with 3% inflation. Sometime we will cross everybody, including United States or maybe China. Everybody will cross because that is in nominal terms. So I think the public policy discourse has to come back to the real terms. So I think that's where we should focus. And I think your second question is much more important than the 2047, in my view, where we can have, a sustainable kind of a growth. I think that's something that we need to, particularly your generation. I think maybe my generation also will escape that. I think your generation will be stuck in this, the kind of dirty growth. So I think you need to focus more on, some kind of a sustainable or green. I mean, there are so many things. I mean, I'm not going to get into that. The lifestyle for sustainable development, all those things are coming up. So I think that is the where we need to focus. And maybe Bhanvi, I think your generation has to take care.
Sure, sir. So I have one more question. Thank you, sir. I have one more question for Pooja ji. So, like for skills in the COVID time, government focused more on skilling and immediate jobs. But now has the government give up on Skill India stand up and India, like related to the Lakpati Didi scheme, they have increased the allocation from 2 crore to adding more 1 CR. So ma'am, I would like to relate this with skill development and related to the creation of women empowerment, basically.
Okay, so even if I talk of women empowerment, and in her speech yesterday, she also mentioned that as far as women are concerned, the percentage of women who have subscribed to STEM programs, etc., right? Science, technology, etc., all these programs, that is on a rise. So is the government face up trying to pose this across with Gyan that they're focusing on it? Yes. But that's the reason when I started out, I said, one, the government needs to increase the kind of money that they're putting into education, into skill development, and alongside generate the jobs. Okay, because again, if I skill my people and I say only but 51.3% is employable youth because I don't have jobs on the other hand, that doesn't really make sense. Right? So from that perspective, yes. Okay.
Yes, one more last question.
Yeah.
Thank you, ma'am.
Yeah.
So, ma'am, it is related to, as we mentioned it last year, there has been reduction in the allocation of budget for Narega scheme specifically. And it was said that it would be increased for the demand-based consumption and demand-based funding would be increased. But if we see in recent budget, there has been a rise in the allocation of budget for specifically Narega. So is it, we can relate it to the election specifically, or we can also link it to the fiscal deficit?
Okay, last year also when they brought down the Narega scheme, there were a lot of discussion that that's not a very realistic number. So if you ask me, was that a realistic number that they came up with? No. If you see the actual spend on Narega this year, that has anyway gone up in 23-24. So this time they're being a little more realistic about it. That's how I would put it. Okay.
I think
Yes, sir.
NR has a point.
Yeah.
No, this I wanted to take on. I think MGNREGS is the only automatic stabilizer in the whole fiscal policy. When I say automatic stabilizer, it is, it's a counter-cyclical kind of a policy. When the economy is doing well, you don't expect more allocation under MGNREGS, right? I mean, particularly when there is no rural distress. When there is a distress, I mean, automatically there is an increase in demand for that job, but particular scheme. And also, I think it's very important for all of us to remember. I mean, not for TK, he knows much more than many of us. But, budget is only a forecast. Okay. And then after that, there is first supplementary demand for grant. There is a second supplementary demand for grant. Then there is a revised estimate. So the numbers that we see in the budget is not a final number. It's not a sacrosanct number. And I think going forward, depending on the demands from the line ministries, it has been added whenever the supplementary demand for grants are done. So now if you reduce the allocation, you will say the allocation is declined. Then if you increase the allocation, you think there's going to be crisis. So I think we have to be, it's just a cycle. So you need to wait and see how the crisis, I mean, how the cyclicality, the shape of the cycle. I think depending on that, you will have allocations.
But NR, what about the climate change? Because this year we have had a good GDP growth number in the real term. But at the same time, agricultural output has suffered because of El Nino type condition, So the counter-cyclical argument you are giving, does it also hold true in this kind of exogenous factor like climate change?
Yeah, ultimately, whether it's exogenous or endogenous, I think it all depends on what is the extent of rural distress, right? So, and that's the reason why you suddenly seen the higher allocation in the MGNRGS in the current year. I mean, that's what we are seeing. And if the El Nino impact continues, I think you will also see much more allocations in the next year also.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. So, if TK sir or Rajesh sir would like to add on this, or any comments they want to.
We will constraint of time. See, just on this balance between economic growth and the environment, I just like to say something. It is absolutely necessary to create that balance. Ultimately, I'm very happy the finance minister used this phrase yesterday. You need equilibrium between the economy and the environment. You need equilibrium between the individual and the collective society. So this is the actual requirement for going forward. But we have climate crisis, not of our creation. It has been done essentially by the emissions by the developed world, but we are the victims. We have to respond to it. It's not enough to merely go in for green energy, rooftop solar, and wind energy and all that. This is as we tackle at the global level. The global policy must be directed to tackle this problem. And my own personal opinion is that reducing emission intensity going forward is no solution. You have to suck out carbon dioxide that has been injected into the atmosphere on very large scale and sequester it, or use it for creating alternate fuels. That is the only solution. For the first time in the climate summit this year or last year, discuss this carbon dioxide removal, CDR. There are various ways of doing it. For the first time, we discussed it. But please understand, this is not fashion. The sixth assessment report of the UN body which studies this said, we have some 2,400 gigatons of carbon injected in the atmosphere. An additional 500 gigatons will ensure that the temperature rises to 1.5 degrees above pre-industrial times. And in order to halt this warming to reach that level, the only way is to suck carbon dioxide, the stock of carbon dioxide already in the atmosphere, to reduce that, you have to suck it out from the air. Just by reducing additional emission, it will not be achieved. And this is to be done by global policy. So this is where our geopolitical clout, our diplomatic might, our advocacy ability, all that must be marshaled to ensure that the entire world focuses on sucking out carbon dioxide. Luckily, some technologies are now being created which will make this possible. The largest oil company in the US is now one of the largest carbon dioxide removal champion because they are getting money from the US government's Infrastructure Reduction Act for this carbon dioxide removal. So some positive things are happening, but we need to marshal our diplomacy and policy and focus attention on carbon dioxide removal. That is key. Anyway, that's a separate subject we can discuss later.
Okay, and so thank you very much. So one last, because we want to make this as policy relevant as possible. So I'd like to start with Rajesh. How much out of 10 will you give this interim budget point-wise, given the
Frankly,
discussion?
frankly speaking, I am just like in opinion that there is no need to give any marks to this actually the interim budget. Just read as a document which might be guidepost for the future government.
Oh, what about you, TK? One-liner?
It's an interim budget. It's an interim budget. It's not really a
Okay.
budget. It's a vote on account. So why even try to measure in terms of policy?
Okay. Pooja, what's your take?
Like TK sir mentioned, end of the day, it's an interim budget, and they stuck very well to the textbookish language also. Good they did not come out with any populist measures. Yeah.
Right. And Bhanu, you're muted.
I want to see budget as a non-event. So
Yeah,
in future.
Yes.
Okay, so this whole tamasha thing keeps coming back and forth. So a lot of action happens outside the budget.
Awesome.
I
Exactly.
think
Agree.
in that sense, I mean, no numbers.
Okay, Bhanvi, we are done. Over to you.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. So, before going to the formal vote of thanks, I would really like to thank each and every panelist for enlightening us, because it was really something that has broadened my horizon of knowledge, because I was not aware of these intricacies of the budget. But yes, today I think I have gone through, or I have understood a little bit like how budget is being prepared and what are the expectations of the public in general. So yeah. So with sir's permission, I would like to go for the formal vote of thanks. Yeah. So
Thanks.
as we come to the end of today's discussion, I, Bhanvi, researcher at IMPRI, Impact and Policy Research Institute, would like to propose the formal vote of thanks on behalf of #IMPRI Center for Study of Finance and Economics. I would like to thank all of you for attending today's deliberation. So it was a panel discussion on general election and interim union budget 2024-25. We are grateful to our chair for the session, Professor Nilanjan Banik ji, and our esteemed panelists, Mr. TK Arun ji, Mr. Saugata Bhattacharya ji, Dr. Pooja Misra ji, Professor N R Bhanumurthy ji, Dr. Rajesh Shukla ji, and Professor Anurag Banerjee for taking part in the discussion and enlightening us. We thank all of our participants who have raised pertinent questions and actively participated in today's deliberation. We are grateful if you're watching us later on our YouTube channel or listening to us on our various podcasts or reading our publications. You may also find more thematic events and book discussions under IMPRI Web Policy Talk series. So we hope you continue to join in future to our IMPRI Web Policy Talk and Web Policy Learning. Wishing you all a very good evening and thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you so much and all the best.
Bye-bye.
Yeah, thank you.